After 47 years of crisscrossing Canada, the Canadian Curling Championship came to the country's largest city, Montreal. Brian Ross was at the airport not only as an Air Canada passenger agent, but also as a competitor on the Quebec rink, giving a welcome to the visitors from every province, plus the Yukon and Northwest Territories. The annual Canadian Curling Association Draw Luncheon served a twofold purpose. It brought all the teams together officially for the first time, and it provided each team with the drama of picking its spot in the preset schedule of games.
It is number 9. Newfoundland draws 9.
What a sight for the games of the '77 Brier. The velodrome that was built for the '76 Olympic Games. And the fans that flocked to the spectacular building saw a spectacular Brier and spectacular opening ceremonies. Over 300 Montreal curling volunteers served on the many committees to make sure everything went smoothly. What a job they did, and how proud they must have felt during these ceremonies to see 2 years of hard work come to fruition. After the music of the masked bands, it was time for the flags and the finest curlers in Canada to receive the plaudits of the crowd. Each team came as a champion in its own right, and the Montreal gathering was a meeting of champions.
Jim Ursel, this was your 4th consecutive Brier, but the first one in your own hometown. It must have given you quite a thrill when you came into the velodrome.
Well, the noise just filled the velodrome, Doug, and it really did give us a lift.
The organizing committee's general chairman, Tom Fisher, welcomed the visitors to Montreal's first ever Brier. Holding the broom for the opening ceremonies was Dick Walsh, the oldest living past president of the Canadian branch of the RCCC, this year celebrating its 125th anniversary. The opening rock, delivered by Emmett Smith, now in his mid-80s, who skipped the Northern Ontario team in the first Brier back in 1927, and again in 1936.
This year, the Northern Ontario team hailed from Sudbury with Rusty Tate at skip, the only member of the foursome with Brier experience. With Bob Miller, George Medikovich, and Wayne Levoy, wound up the week with 4 wins and 7 losses. It was the second Brier for Don Twa and 2 other members of his rink, Kip Boyd at lead and Lionel Stokes at second. Newcomer Johnny Trout, former Canadian school curling champion, was also on the territory's rink. Twa wound up with 5 wins and 6 losses. Lionel Stokes was chosen All-Star second. One of the features of the Brier is the presence of family rinks. The Montreal Brier was no exception. Rolly Mockler of New Brunswick came to the '77 playdowns direct from the Canadian Seniors Championship in Winnipeg and added sons Jeff and Marty to the front end with Phil LePage at third. They wound up with a 3-8 record. The Nova Scotia rink, led by Bob Fitzner, was a contrast in size and background. The rink, assembled just 3 weeks prior to the provincial playdowns, had Bruce MacArthur at third, J.J. McBain at second, and Terry Aho at lead. They'd go home after the week, tied with New Brunswick at 3-8. One of the pre-Brier favorites from the West was Les Rogers and his Saskatchewan foursome of cousin Vic Rogers at lead, second Mo Tate, and third Arch Manwaring. In the third round of play, they met Jim Ursel's Quebec side, who were sporting a fast start with 2 straight wins. Rogers, at this point, was 1-1. Jim, I guess one spot where previous Brier experience helps is in the handling of arena ice.
Well, I think experience helps, Doug. Arena ice tends to be heavier on the outsides, as much as 15 to 20 feet. It's really better to play this kind of ice from the center line outward to avoid the frosty ice.
And you just can't play that same kind of finesse game that you'd like to play.
That's right.
Okay, we're in the 11th end of play. The score tied 7-7. And for the first time in Brier history, the 11th end means an extra end, because this year the Brier moved to 10-end games. With Ursel having last rock, this is Rogers' final rock. He'd like to bury it around the corner guard. Can he get by? No, he rubs. But look where it winds up. And Jim, that gives you a pretty tough shot for your final one.
Well, that rub forced me to change my shot. I was originally planning to draw to the 4-foot, but now I have to go to the raised takeouts with the in-turn.
We'll see what happens. He gets the raise and the takeout. In fact, triple takeout, even if two of them were his own stones. But the key one stayed, and that gave Ursel a final count of 8-7. And Quebec a perfect record of 3 straight victories. Saskatchewan is 1-2. And the crowd loved it.
There were 2 big matches on Tuesday afternoon, at least on paper. One soon developed into a rout as Johnny Usakis of Manitoba took an 8-1 lead over Rogers of Saskatchewan after 5 ends and went on to record his 4th victory against 1 loss. The other game was this one, British Columbia against Ontario. After 3 ends of play, Roy Vinthers holds a 4-1 lead, but Paul Savage of Ontario is still a threat. This is Savage's 4th Brier, all of them in the 70s. He's always been tough. In 73, he wound up tied for 2nd spot. And along with former All-Star lead Ron Green, who now plays 2nd, Ed Werinich and newcomer Reed Ferguson, Savage was here determined to go all out. We're in the 4th end of play. Roy Vinthers trying to put a cap on the front. He's got lots of protection out in front. He wants to protect those 2 shot rocks that he has in the back because Savage has the final rock in this end. What's left for Paul? He's got the chance of a double raise. He has to raise that one on the 8-foot into the 4-foot if he hopes to count. And he's close. But close doesn't count. He does not get the raise. British Columbia picks up 2 to go ahead by a score of 6-1. Eventually, they won the game 10-3 and maintained their unbeaten streak. Jim, your Tuesday game against Tom Reed of Alberta might well illustrate how close the Brier race has become in recent years. In 1975, Reed tied with Don Trois for 2nd spot. Everybody here knew he was a top-rated rink. In the draw for position in the schedule, he'd pulled Newfoundland as an opening opponent. In the past days of the Brier, that might have been considered an easy game.
Not true anymore, Doug. The Eastern teams have caught up to the West, as is proven in the first game where Newfoundland defeated Alberta.
Not only that, but Newfoundland were the reigning champions after Jack McDuff's fine victory in the 1976 Brier in Regina. This is the 10th end of play. At the moment, it's 7-6, advantage Alberta. And now we're looking at that house full of rocks. What to do? Well, Tommy Reed has made his decision. Jim, he threw pretty good weight at that.
He sure did, Doug. But he's got it.
Rolls too far. And Ursel still has the counting stone just outside the 4-foot. Out-turn draw to the other side. This is your chance to win it. Last rock on the 10th end. But wait a minute. Inches too far. Instead of the victory, it's a tie at 7. After 10 ends of play, we're into an extra end. And now the entire situation has changed, Jim. You've got one stone in there, but you've got that last rock against you. There are a couple of rocks out in front. You can see them there on the left. What do you want to do with your final stone here on the 11th end?
Well, we're trying to make it as difficult for Tom as possible, and Art and I were just discussing where we should put that stone. And we finally decided that we should try and get it around that corner guard.
You'd rather have Reed throwing a draw with his final stone or a tough hit than to try and hit something out in the open.
That's right, because he hadn't drawn for a few ends, and we were hoping to force him to make a draw with his final shot.
It doesn't get over quite to the spot that Jim would like to have it. And so it's now up to Tom Reed. There's no hesitation on the part of the Alberta skip. He knows what he wants. It's the takeout. He hits and sticks for an 8-7 victory that hands Quebec its first loss in 5 games and evens Alberta's record at 2 wins and 2 losses. By the time the traditional Brier banquet was held on Tuesday night, British Columbia was in the driver's seat with 5 straight wins. Quebec and Manitoba were each 4-1, while Ontario and Alberta had 3 wins and 2 losses. And that made Wednesday afternoon's draw an important one. Manitoba against British Columbia. Manitoba, with 19 Brier titles in various parts of the province, had a strong team. Dave Romano, former third for Orest Melischuk, and his 1972 champions, was joined by Ed Thompson at second and Bob Collez, later selected as the All-Star lead. Well, Vinthers had experience too. This was the group the press quickly dubbed the Geritol Gang, since at an average age of 40, they were the oldest at the Brier. Third, Leo Hebert and lead Barry Neymark had curled with Lyle Dagg in 1964 and 1970. Neymark had even skipped British Columbia way back in 1959. And second, Greg Pruden, the youngster on the team, had extensive schoolboy curling experience. Now Johnny Usakis throws his last rock on the extra end. The score tied at 7. He'd like to get it buried in there, but it doesn't come over enough. Still, it's in a pretty good position there on the edge of the 4-foot. Now it's all up to Roy Vinthers. All he has to do is to make this shot. He'll keep his unbeaten string intact with 6 straight victories. The out-turn. Gets by the guard, makes it, stays in there for the 8-7 victory. Jim Ursel, that same draw is one that you won't soon forget either. The form chart would have indicated a Quebec win because, after all, you had a 4-1 mark, while Wayne Hamilton of Newfoundland was only 2-3. Incidentally, one of those 2 wins was a Brier record, the first ever shutout in the 47-year history of the championship, an 11-0 victory over Prince Edward Island. But you ran into trouble early against Hamilton and his Newfoundland rink.
Yes, Doug, I missed my first 2 shots on the first end, and Wayne and his boys picked up 2. After 3 ends, they were leading us 5-1, and we just couldn't seem to get anything going in the early ends.
But you did get something going in the middle ends. After blanking the 4th, you got 2 on the 5th, stole 1 on the 6th, and gave up 1 on the 7th when Wayne made his last rock good. And here in the 8th end, the score, 6-4, advantage Newfoundland. You've got one pretty well buried in behind that corner guard, and it's giving some concern to Wayne Hamilton and third Joe Power, the same Joe Power that went on to win the Ross Harstone Memorial Trophy. The trophy given for gentlemanly conduct, good sportsmanship, and curling ability as voted by the curlers. But let's see what Wayne does. Just rubs the Quebec stone and rolls out of play. That gives Ursel an opportunity to pick up 2 on the 8th end, a 2 that will tie the game at 6. In-turn draw. Good sweeping. Make sure that it's there, and that 2 makes it a 6-6 game. Hamilton blanked the 9th end so that he'd have last rock advantage on the 10th end. That's where we are now. First of the skip rocks coming up. Jimmy, where do you want that first stone of yours?
Actually, I'd like to have it about a foot in front of the rings, right on the center line, Doug, to prevent Wayne from getting in there. But as you can see, it's stopped up short.
Okay, that gives Joe Power and Wayne Hamilton a chance now to come around it. And it looks as if that's what they've decided to do. His first delivery, the out-turn draw. One thing about Hamilton, he has strong sweeping on that front end. Ken Thomas and his brother Paul provide that strong sweeping. Fine shot. 2 rocks to come. Ursel decides that he can't do much about that shot rock. He'd better pull into the other side. Try and get behind that long guard out in front and force Hamilton to make his last stone good. The in-turn draw comes through the port, but it does not pull over to the position that Jimmy would like to have. It's open, and this is one spot that I guess any skip would like, Jim. You just need to hit it. It doesn't matter whether you stick or not. You've got that saber in the front there.
That's right, Doug. And the way Wayne was shooting this game, we had to hope for a miracle.
Well, a miracle didn't happen. Dead fine takeout. He rolled out, but he still had that one shot that gave him the victory, 7-6. That made Newfoundland's record 3 wins and 3 losses. Quebec now 4-2. By Thursday, Roy Vinthers and his BC side had an imposing record. Their mark of 7 straight wins was 2 better than that of their closest pursuers, Quebec, Alberta, and Manitoba. And their opponents this draw were the luckless PEI side led by Ken McDonald. It was 7-0 against 0-7. We're in the 9th end of play. The score, 5-4, advantage British Columbia. The Prince Edward Island side, despite their record, boasts 15 Purple Hearts, including 8 that belong to third Georgie Dillon. The front end has Alan Ledgerwood and Keith McEachern providing the sweeping on this shot that Prince Edward Island hopes will provide 2. And it does. Now we go into the 10th end of play. It could be the final end. 6-5 is the score. 2 rocks to come. This is McDonald's final stone. The in-turn takeout attempt. He'd like to get the roll. A rub onto the shot rock. And he hangs at the back of the 4-foot for shot. Now it's up to Roy Vinthers. If he can get the shot rock at the back, he could count 2. But is it available? He's trying for it. But the out-turn hangs out. He does get the roll, and who is shot? The measure goes to British Columbia. The score is tied after regulation play. The final 2 stones of the 11th end coming up. McDonald has last rock. Vinthers would like to put that out in front, or at least at the front half of the house. But it slides through, the ice very keen, giving lots of backing for Kenny McDonald. I guess, Jim Ursel, this is one spot where you sometimes throw that 2-in-1 shot. You want to be there to the backing, and sometimes you put a little extra onto it.
Well, Kenny had the backing, but the ice was very keen down the middle, and as you saw, he slipped right through.
That gave 2 to British Columbia. Kept their record intact with 8 straight wins. The final score, 8-6 for Vinthers over McDonald. By the time Thursday night's 11th draw was convened, the fans were beginning to wonder if this might be the year for an undefeated record. The last time that had happened had been 1969, when Ron Northcott won all his games. Jim, you had the bye in that round.
We were fortunate, Doug. We had the bye Tuesday and Thursday, so we really had lots of rest. The worst bye to get was the first draw and the last draw.
And that was the bye that Roy Vinters of British Columbia drew. That meant that British Columbia had to play 11 straight games without a rest. We're in the 10th end of play. The score is 6-5 for Alberta, and a fine shot by Tommy Reed has just passed Vinters Stone through the back.
An absolutely outstanding shot, Doug. But now Roy Vinters has an even tougher shot. He has to remove both those rocks in the forefoot and has to stay himself. An almost impossible shot.
Well, he's going for that impossible shot with the outturn. Contact, but has he rolled too far? The upraised hands from British Columbia indicate that the shot was good. The impossible shot was made possible by Roy Vinters, and we're into an extra end of play, tied at 6. Don Aiken and Brian Ross can hardly believe it. It's the final rock of the extra end. Kevin Byrne holds the broom for Tommy Reed. Brother Lorne Reed and Tony Rankle provide the sweeping. He goes with the in-turn. Makes contact, stays in the rings, counts the single point that gives him a 7-6 victory and British Columbia's first loss after 8 straight wins. It leaves Quebec and Alberta with records of 6 wins and 2 defeats each. Every year, more and more members of the media from across Canada converge to cover the Canadian Curling Championship. And on Friday, before play began, the members of the media gathered for a luncheon where they showed their own style of championship form. During the festivities, Canadian curling reporters president Don Fleming of Edmonton, a man with the colorful nickname of Buckets, was on the receiving end of a presentation from Canada Packers Montreal plant manager René Beauchard.
There was really no contest in the competition this year. The baloney of the Brier for 77 buckets. Show the label bucket.
Well, by this time, the media, as well as the Montreal fans, were eager for the Friday afternoon meeting between Quebec and the leading British Columbia side. We're in the 5th end of play. It's a 3-all tie. Quebec has last rock, and Jim, you've got a chance for some extra points.
Yes, Doug, we have 2 in the house at this stage of the game, and I'm drawing to the open side to be laying 3.
You'd like to force Vinters to put all his play onto that side of the ice.
That's absolutely correct. I'm not too concerned if he makes the double on those 2 red stones, as long as I have the opportunity to pick up 2 this end.
Vinters goes with the in-turn takeout. It pulls over a little far, only removes 1, rolls out himself, and leaves Quebec with the opportunity now for 3 points. This could break the game wide open.
I'm playing my last shot to the same spot as my first shot because I know exactly what the weight is and what ice to take on that side of the ice.
Well, the strategy is good. Aiken and Ross just lightly sweep to make sure it's there. It's there for 3 points and a 6-3 advantage for Quebec after 5 ends of play. They split deuces on the 6th and the 7th, and here in the 8th end of play, the score is now 8-5. Vinters has last rock, a good chance for 2 with his rock in a good position. But Ursel has other plans. And that leaves Roy Vinters with just his last rock to count. It's there for the single that makes the score 8-6. And even though they gave up 1 on the 9th, Quebec didn't have to finish the 10th. They won the game 9-6 and wound up with a record of 7 wins and 2 losses after this draw, virtually tied with British Columbia at 8-2. The problem now was to maintain momentum. They couldn't afford to lose, nor did they. It was shots like this one in Quebec's 7-2 win over Manitoba that convinced the All-Star selectors that Ursel was the All-Star skip. Teammate Art Lobel was chosen 3rd. In the same draw, British Columbia lost to Newfoundland. Each now had 8 wins,
but British Columbia had 3 losses to Quebec's 2. That left it to the final draw on Saturday afternoon. BC had to sit out that final round, hoping that a Nova Scotia win would create a 2-way tie for top spot. Ontario needed the combination of a win and a Quebec loss to force a 3-way tie. Quebec, they wanted a win to gain their first ever Canadian curling championship. Coming home, the score was 7-4 for Quebec. Nova Scotia's Bob Fitzner had to steal 3 to tie it. And when he came up short on this shot, it was all over. Quebec had its first ever Brier tankard with a record of 9 wins and 2 losses. Jimmy, it must have been a great moment for you.
Well, all I can say is that after 5 Briers and 25 years of curling, it's been an unbelievable experience. And I know that Art and Donnie and Brian feel exactly the same way.
Well, unbelievable to you, but very believable to the thousands of fans that saluted you in the Velodrome that day. 1977 Canadian curling champions. Jimmy Ursel, Art Lobel, Donnie Aiken, and Brian Ross. Tied for second in the final standings, British Columbia's Roy Vinthers and Ontario's Paul Savage, each with a record of 8 wins and 3 losses. Wayne Hamilton of Newfoundland came in 4th with 7-4. An emotional moment as the 1977 winners received the McDonald Brier tankard from David M. Stewart. Throughout the week, the crowd had supported the Quebec team. Now it was time for Jim to express the team's thanks. As the crowd stood to sing "O Canada," you could be pardoned if you reflected that while Quebec won the Canadian Curling Championship, the sport of curling was the big winner at the Montreal Brier. Curling, with its elements of competition, friendship, and sportsmanship that linked spectators and players alike in a common bond.